Yeah, so like I said, just to make sure most of our participants are joining for the presentation, I'll just take a quick moment to introduce the Association of Energy Engineers and AEE Alberta chapter for those of you who are not familiar with us. AEE is the main body of training for energy professionals for over 4 decades with the mission of promoting the scientific and educational interests of these engaged in the energy industry and fostering action for sustainable development. And here at AEE Alberta chapter, we are continuing with the same mission and values as AEE Center, with the goal of educating energy professionals with the help of our partner organizations, but also specifically CIET, Canadian Institute for Energy Training. And I would definitely recommend checking out their website for upcoming trainings and events. Don't forget to use AEE code to get your free membership, annual AEE Alberta chapter membership. And we always appreciate your feedbacks on our presentations, webinars, and also just if you have any webinar ideas or anything to be emailed to us at info@aeealberta.org. I will just copy it here so everybody has the address. And of course, our newsletter. Please make sure you are on the newsletter to get all the updates about all the upcoming events. A very brief introduction about Eric Mazzi. He's an engineer and policy specialist working in demand-side energy efficiency. He has worked in the energy industry for 30 years in different roles, including consultant, maintenance manager, researcher, utility engineer, and educator. For the past 13 years, he has focused on demand-side energy systems in industrial and commercial facilities. Eric is a practitioner of MMV, a member of the IPMVP committee, an instructor for the CMVP certification, and a member of AEE. Thank you again, Eric, for your time. I'm just going to hand it over to you and yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. As a sound check, you can hear me okay? Sol or John?
Yeah.
Great.
Yes, that's great.
Great.
Thank you.
So I see we have 12 participants. That might be including myself. We're going to start with a little poll. Okay, so you should be able to see on the screen. I'm trying to get an idea, you know, what the M&V background is for those of you who are on the call here. So if you can go to menti.com, as it shows there, MENTI.com, punch in the code 394552. Just use your cell phone or computer. And just check one of the boxes. You know, do you have direct experience with M&V? Maybe you oversee or review M&V. You're only indirectly involved, like you see M&V results, or you don't know anything about M&V and you want to learn more. So we got 2 responses already. That's great. Got about 8. All right, just 5 more seconds. Awesome. Okay, well, it's probably about right then, because I've assumed that there's not a whole lot of, you know, that it's for a more general audience, not necessarily assuming that you have experience with M&V. Let me go back to my second question and final. Well, maybe I'll save that question. I'll save that question. All right. All right, let's get into it here. So I'm calling this the 7 not so hidden secrets of effective M&V for energy efficiency projects. And so I'll give a very brief overview of M&V basics. I'll talk about the 7 not so hidden secrets, and then we can get into some discussion and Q&A. Okay, so what is M&V? Most are probably familiar. It's the International Measurement and Verification Protocol is a committee, one that I belong to, the IPMVP. M&V is a process, as you can read there: planning, measuring, collecting data for purpose of verifying, reporting energy savings. Now, the most common terminology is energy conservation measures, and for certain reasons, I prefer to use energy saving measures. Efficiency is preferred over conservation. We will revisit that later. For those of you familiar with ASHRAE, like the audit standard and audit textbook, ASHRAE prefers energy efficiency measure over energy conservation. So those concepts, are not what we're here to focus on, but they are important. We're going to talk about energy savings because that's what the protocol focuses on. Now, the main definition says, verify and measure energy savings, right? Or determine energy savings is the more specific terminology. There are additional purposes of M&V to improve energy savings. We're going to show some data on that. To document utility cost savings, so it's not just the energy. And when I use the term energy, that could be applied to peak power as well. But often, we're talking about electricity, natural gas savings for facilities. You can use M&V to build capacity. Think of a company or an organization, the meters, the tools, the data and the systems for maybe a one-time M&V effort can be transitioned to an ongoing system and resources to monitor and improve savings for the life of a measure. And another important aspect is, validating and credibility for energy savings, such as for securing financing. If you work in the M&V world or see M&V reports, you probably at first a little baffled, like I was so many years ago, because there's a specific terminology: option A, option C, option D. What do these mean? So these A, B, C, D options are integral to the IPMVP. And I want to mention other commonly used M&V protocols like ASHRAE 14. The US has their Federal Energy Management Program, or FEMP. There's an international standards, or ISO, and they all use the same. They all use the same language and essentially the same definitions as IPMVP: option A, B, C, D. So there's really 3 groups or 3 approaches. One is retrofit isolation, where you have a specific system like a lighting system or a boiler, and you might measure all the parameters you consider relevant. That would be option B, as in boy. If you, for various reasons, to save money, you might just measure what's considered to be key parameters. Option C is a whole facility, typically using utility meters, but not necessarily. It could be, a whole product line on a production system that's not necessarily a utility meter. And then there's a computer simulation approach, and that is where it's more common for major retrofits or new construction, where the baseline is hypothetical. The most clear example of that is, say, a new building or a new industrial plant. Your baseline system is the less efficient, lower cost plant or building that was never built. So it's usually referred to as a hypothetical baseline. So how do you get baseline energy to derive some sort of energy savings? Well, you have to do a computer simulation of that. You can't go measure something that was never built. So those are the 4 options. This is a common graph that and chart that shows the timeline, if you will, and some of the key concepts for M&V. So we start with a baseline period, and this is best understood thinking about a retrofit project, where you have a baseline system and, through an energy management program, it's decided to invest in some measure, which can be a physical retrofit. It could be a behavior change program, a little more of a soft measure, if you will. But there's an implementation period, and then at some point, equipment is declared to be commissioned. and the reporting period starts. The reporting period is the terminology for that, post-install, think of, post-retrofit system. An important part of a concept of energy M&V is energy savings are not just the before and after. It's not the difference between just your baseline and your reporting period. It's actually the difference between your adjusted baseline and your reporting period energy or power if you were, verifying and measuring peak power. At the top of this slide is the fundamental M&V equation that's in all the protocols, where savings is your baseline energy, the difference between baseline and reporting period, plus or minus adjustments. Or in simple, little more simplified, with what's called the avoided energy approach, where you take your reporting period as your reference condition. There are a couple of alternatives that we're not going to cover today because of no time. But the usual is, savings is your adjusted baseline energy, and the difference between that and your measured reporting period energy, just like it shows in the graph, the difference between the blue line and the green line. So the IPMVP is, a framework. The core concepts 2016 is the current, you could call master or high level reference for the IPMVP. That core concepts is being updated by EVO, the efficiency evaluation organization, which owns and created the IPMVP. So I'm participating in that as a member of the IPMVP. For example, I raise my hand. I'm responsible for updating overseeing the updating of the option D methodology in the new protocol that's scheduled to come out a year from now on a 5-year cycle. What we're showing here is that IPMVP actually has a bunch of different guides, like for renewables, for uncertainty assessment, so what's called issues and examples. Those are available. There's M&V guidelines and best practices, if you will, for EPC, which are energy performance contracts, for EM&V, which stands for evaluation, measurement, and verification. We mentioned adjustments. Well, there's non-routine adjustments and non-routine events. Those are really important. And there's also a team working on M&V for water. And then on the lower left, EVO also has a financing protocol that is available, and you can find all that on their site. But we're going to focus on the core concepts. But you should know, if you, as a practitioner or a reviewer, that there's other more specific guides that work together, that are useful. Okay, that's the end of the intro. So not so hidden secret number one. Okay, you have to measure something on the energy savings measure, or it is not M&V. It does seem to be a hidden secret in some cases. I had a very excellent client talking about doing a project a few years ago to develop an M&V strategy. And then at one point it was like, well, can we save money by, is there a way not to do any measurements? And my reply was, well, yes, there are, but we cannot call it M&V. It's very basic. You have to measure something on the system that you're going to claim savings. And there is something called deemed savings, which probably many of you have come across, right? And deemed savings, it is measurement-based, because what deemed savings really is, in basic terms, is measurement on other systems. Like lighting, right? You can go and get measured data on, a certain manufacturer, model number, spec for lighting. And it was measured maybe in a real world system, maybe, in a lab environment. And one might decide to use those values for, the kilowatts, right? The power consumption. Well, that's fine. Those are still measurements, but they're not, if you're not measuring any samples, anything on the actual installed system for which you're going to report savings, you cannot call that, M&V. You cannot call it IPMVP adherent. And that link at the bottom of this slide, there's a little discussion about EVO's position on deemed savings. And you know, the short story is, you know, you have to measure something to call it measurement and verification on the system that you're reporting. Okay. Not so hidden secret number 2. Now let me go to my, this is a good time to do a poll. So, so you should be able to go to menti.com again and punch in the code 394552. I'll verify that. And you, so which of these would you describe as data? And you can select multiple. So this is not just one answer. I'm going to check it on my phone too, just the 394552. Yeah. So the first one is predicted energy consumption from a building model, predicted consumption from a regression model, utility bill, energy consumption figures, electric or gas submeter readings. Great, we're getting responses. And let's give it, say, 10 more seconds. Maybe we get a few more replies. And Sol, as a moderator, you're a professional too. If you get a chance to put in your comments, that would be great. Okay. So, you know, we have most of the dots say utility bill, consumption figures, and submeters are data. Interestingly, utility bills got one more vote, if you will, than electric or gas. Consumption figures out of a building or a regression model got some votes. So we'll talk about that. Okay. So not all quote unquote data or data. Okay. So M&V uses a definition of data, which is just basic science. There are other times data is used with multiple meanings. My favorite one to point out is a computer scientist who says, you know, all this information on my laptop, the one I'm right here looking at, that's my data. Well, yes, to a computer scientist or IT person, yes. To a physicist or a psychologist who's getting observations of, you know, some physical system or some group of people, that's not data, right? So I love this 4-box model from it's from a basic undergrad philosophy of science, and it talks about how science works, and I really keep this model in mind. I use it for teaching the CMVP. I use it to remind myself to keep on track when we're doing M&V. So when you're doing M&V, it's just an applied science where you have some real world system, right? You've got your boiler system, you've got a measurement boundary. If you read the protocols, every protocol says be careful about choosing your boundary of your system. Very good. And your temporal boundaries, meaning your time. What's your baseline period? What's your reporting period? And so on. Well, people build models, spreadsheet models. You know, E equals MC squared might be the most famous model on the planet. You can build physical models and visual models of real world systems. And the reason models are useful is because we use them to make predictions, such as energy consumption, right? So the other part of a scientific process, of which M&V is to collect data, observations of that real world system, right? Like energy consumption, measurement of operating hours, measuring the peak, you know, kilovolt amps. Those are all, you know, measurements. And the whole purpose of the exercise is you want to compare your real world system to your model. And the way we do that is we compare our model predictions to the data that we collect, observations. And the closer they match, the better we consider our model to be, knowing that it will never be perfect. And one of the points I make in this presentation that'll be worth repeating later is that, you know, there are cases where people confuse their model with the real world, such as, well, my DOE building model says that, you know, the consumption is blah, blah, blah. Well, the consumption is what's metered to be with an error. It's not necessarily the number that, you know, spit out from your model. Okay, so don't confuse the numbers on your spreadsheet necessarily to the real world system. Just keep in mind, you know, spreadsheet numbers are a model of a real world system. They aren't the real world system itself. So here's some real data set. Now, this is an actual real data set, or a sample of it that from one of my M&V projects. Now, there's a lot of numbers there, so I'm going to toggle back and forth and explain what I'm talking about. So from this real data set on the previous slide, okay, here's some questions that I asked myself. Why are some cells highlighted and others not, right? So, I mean, I altered this a bit, just, you know, some cells were highlighted, you know, I'm not going to show the whole spreadsheet, but I condensed it into something that would fit on the slide to show all the different unusual attributes of this quote unquote data set. So some cells were highlighted in one color, some were highlighted in another. I noticed that some of the highlighted cells were zeros. So I was questioning, well, are these measured numbers or did somebody put them in a spreadsheet? So why are some numbers integers and others real numbers with many decimal places? Okay, so these are actually supposed to be power or kW figures for a bunch of industrial fans, right? So, you know, why is it that the second column, so the first column are 15-minute reading dates, right? 15-minute time intervals. The second column, if you can't see it so well, it's got numbers like 551.6735 as the power value. Well, why is it that some of the other numbers are 103.00000? Like, why are some integers and some real numbers? I mean, are they metered? Did it get truncated? Like, where did that number come from? You know, what's the difference between these area codes? There were 3 different error codes in the data set. There's a unit down, there's no data, and there's COM failure. So what does that, what do these mean? Does unit down mean the fan was not working, but the metering system was? No data, what does that mean? Does that mean the unit was out of service, or just that the meter was out, or maybe the data acquisition communication system was out, which is probably the COM failure. My point is, you know, as an M&V analyst, I see these things, and you should, and I did go back and say, wow, what do these 3 different error codes mean? Where do they come from? You know, which of these numbers are metered numbers that have an error associated, which maybe were, you know, backfilled. I also noticed there were some blank cells and there were some zeros. And, you know, one should be asking, you know, well, what are these blank cells? What does that mean? There's not even an error code, it's just blank. So, you know, this is a real data set. You know, are the zero values really zero? Okay, if you assume 0 for a baseline energy, you're going to underestimate your baseline energy, which arguably is a good conservative approach. If you assume 0 values for your reporting period energy, you're going to, maybe there's real power consumption and you're going to overstate the energy savings by assuming 0. So we're not going to answer all these questions. The point is, that's a sample of a real quote unquote data set. And the bottom line is, some of those numbers were data and some were input by a co-op student, and it took a while to sort that all out. So on our Mentimeter survey, right, we had utility consumption figures, and are those data or not? Well, my answer is it depends. Okay, here's 2 utility bills. So the one on the left is a little excerpt of a natural gas daily volume in gigajoules from ATCO Gas. Be familiar to those of you in Alberta. The one on the right is from Piedmont Natural Gas, a project I was doing in North Carolina. It has daily natural gas figures in therms or BTUs, both daily values for January 1st to the 15th or so, 2019. Okay, these 2 utility bills, one is real data and one is not. So which one? You can't tell by looking at this. How as an M&V analyst or maybe a reviewer, how can you tell which? Well, you know, as the analyst, I went to ATCO at some point and I said, you know, we've got these nice daily figures, and I was suspicious because I did some regression modeling with these daily figures. And the models just came out almost too good to be true. Like it really fit a very specific equation. So I checked with ATCO Gas and I just put in the quotes there, the email I received from ATCO Gas after a number of calls and so on with customer service. Dear Eric Mazzi, thank you, blah, blah, blah. You know, ATCO Gas reads low and medium use sites monthly, high use sites, which have a gas, effectively the short story is if a site's over 8,000 gigajoules per year, typical consumption, which this site was not, and you know, there would be a, if it is that high, then it'll be a gigajoule per day utility bill charge. And so that's when ATCO Gas actually records the daily gas data. So I've got a site that's much, much lower than 8,000 gigajoules per year. It does not fit that high consumption rate class. That's not on the bill. It's a different rate class. So why do I have daily numbers? Well, you know, I never got ATCO to say, I didn't even bother asking because it's very clear the monthly gas values are data. The daily gas values have to be predictions. The utility says we don't take, you know, from our telemetry, we don't take daily readings because we don't have to do a demand charge, but these nice daily numbers show up on the bill and they fit a really perfect, almost too perfect regression model. So I went back and redid my analysis and I just used the monthly values because those are metered numbers. These numbers came from an equation. I did the same thing with my Carolina client. And in fact, they confirmed, you know, thank you for contacting Piedmont Natural Gas. Our meters are read daily. We have automatic meter reading devices. These are real data, metered, collected on a daily basis. And in fact, you know, I had some pretty imperfect models, which to me confirmed that, yeah, okay, these are not too good to be true. So my point is, you know, back to our Mentimeter, you know, this. So first of all, predicted numbers from any model, you know, are not data, are not measured data. Those are predictions, right? Utility bill consumption figures most of the time are, but I just showed you an example where sometimes they're not. And there are other cases too, like my home, BC Hydro bills, well, sorry, take that back. BC Gas and then Terracin Gas and I guess Fortis BC, I haven't checked recently, bills on a monthly basis, but unless they've changed their practice, they actually read the meter every 2 months. But I get a monthly gas figure on my bill. How does that happen? Well, that means every other month is an estimate, right? Not every month on that. Just because it's on a bill doesn't mean it's a measured value. That's the key point. And that's important from an M&V perspective. You need to know if those values are measured or coming out of an equation. Okay, so it's important to know that you have to measure something. It's important to understand and sort out, you know, what's real data, what's a prediction, what values were backfilled, and so on. All those issues you'll find in the, for example, the various protocols and best practices. And another, you know, moving on to hidden secret or not so hidden secret number 3 is M&V is claimed to improve energy savings. If you read the various protocols, somewhere IPMVP, ASHRAE, and others typically claim that M&V actually helps improve the performance of energy saving projects. And I'm finding that to be true. I've selected 4 industrial projects that I've done myself. Now I admit this is a bias sample, not every, I'll just back up a little bit. In the M&V work I do with BC Hydro, the standard practice is to, you know, have, let's say, a 12-month reporting period, and then, but there's typically an interim M&V done, like a few months or 6 months into the project, interim, right? And what this chart is comparing is interim M&V findings in the blue bars with final M&V results in the, I don't know, sort of orange-ish bars in megawatt hours per year of electricity savings. So there's 4 different projects, a couple pumps, conveyor conversion, a building, demand ventilation. And in each of these cases, you know, when we found the interim results were, say, less than what was estimated, or let's say an incentive value, an energy study estimate from pre-project, when it's considered to be underperforming, basically the staff in many cases say, hey, wait a minute, let's go check it out, right? Like this building ventilation, it went from, I don't know, 1,700 to 2,500 megawatt hours per year. That's a pretty substantial. And what happened is, oh, well, there's a whole set of fans that we forgot or somehow did not get reprogrammed, right? And those types of activities are common in my experience. It doesn't happen every time. Sometimes it's performing just as expected. Great, fair enough. But actually, you know, M&V, if you follow the standard protocols from M&V process starts with the design and planning of a project. It doesn't just come in at the end and say, oh, well, let's go observe what happened here. What were the savings? When M&V is done in, let's say, an IPMVP adherent process, meaning M&V is involved from planning through to, you know, post-install and post-commissioning and so on. M&V can actually help improve the savings. It's not just an independent activity that observes everything and records it. And just another example, this is a project that it's a water pump upgrade, electricity savings in megawatt hour per year. And this one is for various contractual reasons. M&V is required to be done and updated every year. Energy performance contracts do something similar to this. And the first year, the savings were, you know, well over 400 megawatt hour per year. The year 2, it dropped down to 350. Year 3, the savings were 0. And then across all these years, you know, the plant operations are getting these numbers like, well, okay, we'll look into it. Year 4, savings start getting up. Year 5 and 6, savings got back up, not to where they were, but they did actually figure something out with that system and got it improving in terms of energy consumption relative to the baseline. And this is just another example. This is a slice. This is one project across time, just for additional comparison. So M&V can, and I'll just say if done properly and carefully, you can actually, M&V will help improve the energy savings if it's not working well. This is just another example about so what that table is this is the M&V results for the energy savings of thermal curtains on greenhouses. So it's public information. That's why I'm showing you all the numbers. This is from California. And I just want to comment that so this project was part of an impact evaluation. So for those of you familiar with evaluation, you know, impact evaluation is where you know, an evaluator tries to estimate the, you know, energy savings for a group of projects typically. And in this case, they actually implemented IPMVP option D. But my point is, this was all done well after the fact, like years after the fact. They went back and remodeled the system, computer simulation option D. So it looks like, you know, it in many ways does adhere to IPMVP and the other protocols, but it really doesn't, because there was no M&V activity throughout the process, right? Someone just came in after the fact. And so the point is, just doing even very careful modeling and measurements after the fact is not as good as having M&V involved throughout the process. And that's in fact what IPMVP specifies, right? Be involved throughout the process. Not so hidden secret number 4, first understand the system, then analyze the data in that order. I mean, there's a lot of other things. It can be very tempting as an M&V analyst, for example, if you're doing it yourself or hiring a consultant. Okay, we got data, let's start analyzing it. No, no, no. First, make sure you have a good, careful description of your system. Review, you know, this would all be part of an M&V plan, what analyses you're going to do. And in fact, in the analysis, you know, don't start running models first. The first thing you do is chart your data. So if you want to put an intermediate step in there, it's, you know, understand your system, review how your analysis is supposed to be done, chart your data, then analyze in that order. So what this picture is, this is in Carolinas, where I agreed to do the M&V for a behavior change program on 6 different healthcare facilities. And, you know, I'm pretty remote here in Vancouver, where I'm based, and this is, of course, in the Charlotte area, North Carolina. Well, you know, I agreed to do it and offered, and I said, well, I really have to visit the site. You know, as an M&V analyst, I need to be familiar with what's going on. And sure enough, this is one of the sites where driving in to the hospital parking lot, what do I see? Well, what you see there is a temporary air handling unit in the parking lot because there's a bunch of equipment being ripped out and replaced. They had 4 or 5 major, you know, air handling units being replaced under construction, and I had that was unknown to me, you know, or any of my project team members. I only just observed it when I get on site. There were 2 of these, in fact. So, you know, when you're doing a behavior change and you're using an option C, which is what I was doing, and you're trying to detect in the data like less than 5% energy savings is what was expected. Well, when you show up and see that there's whole air handling systems being replaced, you know, the building's ripped open, there's air being pumped into the parking lot, cooled and, you know, dehumidified and whatnot, and then being sent back into the building, you know, that's bigger than 5% change. You know, and I would have never known that potentially unless I actually visited the site. So, you know, so some tips about understanding the system. I'm not going to read all these, and by the way, I will make these slides available to AEE to share with the group. I know it's being recorded as well. You know, look at good, you know, get good records, get good post-install records, the verification of M&V. Try and understand the people who are making decisions about how systems are operate. Get some firsthand experience. You know, that's always balanced against the cost of M&V. But, you know, just be cautious. If you're doing M&V or you're hiring someone to do M&V, it's like, well, let's save some money and just send us the data and we'll analyze it. Just realize things can, you know, things can happen with that kind of cost-saving approach. Now with COVID, you know, that's a whole ballgame. Like there's obviously health reasons why people may not be able to see the systems firsthand. And I just want to give a plug, not being commercial here, but I saw a recent presentation from Clear Result. Maybe some of you are with Clear Result on this webinar, but they teamed up with a company called Stream, and they offer virtual services to do things like site inspections and audits. Basically finding a way to get some of that firsthand facility information without actually being there. So Clear Result, and I'm sure others have those types of services. Hidden secret number 5, and we're getting closer to the end. There's not a lot of on some of these other hidden secrets, but an M&V point person is essential. To be you know, the IPMVP has guidelines for being adherent to the IPMVP, the phrase adherent, and one of the basic requirements to be adherent, according to the IPMVP, is you need a designated M&V professional. So for reasons of adherency, and in my opinion, just plain old common sense, it's really important to have a point person. And in my opinion, that point person should be someone who has a CMVP. CMVP is a certified measurement verification professional. I mean, I'm just speaking to my experience. Someone who's just even a PEng with lots of energy experience, but not necessarily, you know, no M&V training, or an officer of the company. And what I'm referring to here, there's in British Columbia, there's a transmission service rate policy where transmissions, you know, high voltage connected customers can claim energy savings, and they do. IPMVP is cited in this policy. It's a public policy in British Columbia. And they basically say, well, the impact analysis can be certified by a PEng, a CMVP, a PEng, or an officer of the company. And in my opinion, an officer of the company or just any PEng is really not sufficient. I mean, that's kind of, in my own opinion, a relatively weak requirement. It can be done by people who don't necessarily have the experience or training to catch all these nuances, understand things like baselines. There's some information on the CMVP. CIT, Canadian Institute of Energy Training, offers it in Canada, AEE, of course, in the US, and EVO is the owner. My next to last not so hidden secret is, and it's probably more hidden than the others, but M&V should count the quantity and quality of services, not just energy or power. So what's meant by quantity and quality of services? So for example, with lighting systems, quantity would be lumens. With lighting systems, quality would be things like glare, color temperature, color rendering index. With lumber drying is just one of a myriad of industrial processes. Quantity would be board feet per year. Quality would be measured as, you know, percent moisture in the dried lumber or percent defects. So where does this come from? Well, actually since 2007, the California Public Utility Commission, which oversees the 4 major public investor-owned public utilities, Southern Cal Edison, Southern Cal Gas, PG&E, San Diego. It's really one of the main resources for energy efficiency policy in North America. But they actually define electricity savings and also natural gas savings, I just didn't put both, as reduced energy by reducing, but with paying attention to the baseline energy quantity and quality of energy services. So, I mean, you can read that or read that on your own time. My basic point is that ingrained in one of the main policy jurisdictions on the planet really is the idea that the quantity and quality of services delivered by these systems is important when quantifying electricity savings and natural gas savings. I'm going to pause for a drink of water. And in fact, in energy management, you'd be well served for anybody. My advice is pay attention to the quantity and quality of service. The whole main point is to try and reduce energy and associated costs by delivering the same or better services in both quantity and quality. If you can do that, you're more likely to be successful. And how does this relate to M&V? Well, those measures of quantity and quality are really data and variables in the data to measure those variables to use for adjustments in the IPMVP and so on. They talk about very clearly routine and non-routine adjustments. We're not going to get into the difference today, but those metrics or measures of quantity and quality, those are what an M&V analyst would use to make those adjustments, right? Back to the one of the first slides about the common M&V chart, we have a baseline and then you have a post, and the basic equation is really from an avoided energy approach, which is the common approach, not only approach, but the most common. The energy savings is the adjusted baseline energy minus the reporting period energy. That adjusted baseline energy takes into account measures of quantity and quality. If your occupancy, if your production rate's changing, those are variables that at least in principle, if you get the data, you can adjust the energy and put your baseline and your reporting period on, what's usually called an apples to apples basis. And then I just want to emphasize the current relevance. A lot of energy saving measures were intended for, normal planet, not a COVID planet. So we're seeing shifts in occupancies, higher in some places, buildings lower in others. Higher ventilation rates is an example of the quality. Well, the higher ventilation rates doesn't mean that the energy saving measure is malperforming or misperforming just because, the post-install energy is higher. It's higher because the required quality of air in the space has now changed. And so one could and should do an adjustment to the baseline to the extent that's feasible, right? And then the last, what I call not so hidden secret is that, a good applied scientist is more critical to M&V than a good statistician. It sort of takes in some other concepts. The conceptual issues, in my opinion, often are more important than the fancy math, okay? So, do you have a valid baseline? I've seen projects where people said, oh, well, the baseline energy is such and such number. And then when I went back and calculated how could that, let's say, that many kilowatt hours of year been consumed by the baseline system. This was actually a lumber drying operation. Well, I did the M&V. Well, the only way it could have done that is if the motors operated at like, you know, a service factor of about 130 to 150% all year round. Well, that's physically impossible. No motors will do that, not all year round. Maybe for a number of seconds, minutes, hours, or days, but they're going to burn out at, you know, 8,000 hours per year, operating 30 to 50% above their rated output. It just won't happen. So the baseline system energy was physically impossible. That baseline system could not have done that. And I had engineers arguing to me that that's the appropriate baseline energy. So the conceptual issue was better, you know, more important than the math in that example. Again, have good information and data, if you will, on the system, the pre-retrofit or baseline, the post-retrofit. Understand the difference between data and predictions. That's just as a reminder, you know, I often hear people say, oh, give me your data for, you know, what's going to happen in 2021. Well, that's a different definition of data. Like, you can't have data for the year 2021 of anything, right? You can't have something measured that did not occur yet, okay, from a basic science definition of data. Now, some other definition, fine. Really, it's what's your prediction that is supposed to happen in 2021, right? You know, energy world is full of predictions that rarely occur as expected. Numbers from equations are usually not data, just a reminder there. A couple more tips to wrap up hidden secret. Our last hidden secret here is, I've been in projects, you know, if you're seeking if you're involved with a project and you're seeking more sophisticated statistical models, I mean, to me, that's a little bit of a trigger to say, well, we're probably trying to compensate for some omitted variables or poor data. You know, just as an example, a common approach for buildings is you have energy data and outdoor air temperature, and you have models. And I mean, there are, you know, ASHRAE, there are approaches to break your models up into, you know, piecewise models and all sorts of non-ordinary least squares methods and so on. But from another perspective, you can analyze that model to death, but you can't compensate for missing occupancy data. If the occupancy was changing in a substantial quantity, you know, you're not going to be able to tease that out with the fanciest and most sophisticated statistical models when all you have is temperature and energy. And again, be aware of confusing a model for the real world. In many examples in my career, including M&B, very competent people present their spreadsheet results as this is what's happening. That's energy or GHG emissions. So I tend to phrase those as Earth versus a spreadsheet. You know, there is a real world system, and we should all keep in mind our spreadsheet or our model results are an imperfect representation of that real world. So don't get the two confused. So that's it. And in summary, you know, just the 7 not so hidden secrets: measure something, or it's not M&V, something on the actual system. Measurements from other systems that are similar but another place and time do not count for IPMVP M&V. Not all data are data. We've killed that concept, I think. M&V really does improve energy savings, at least sometimes. So M&V should be done as part of the whole process, not just parachute in at the end and observe what happened. First, analyze the systems, the baseline, the post-install, and then analyze in that order. A point person is critical, both for technical and the people and organizational reasons. M&V should count the quantity and quality of services and pay attention to it, not just energy or power. And if for no other reason, think of those routine and non-routine adjustments that may need to be considered. There's lots of other reasons I could get into in terms of general energy management. You'll be more successful if you can find a way to make systems perform the same or better in terms of quantity and quality. That's a formula for success. And again, you know, a good applied scientist is more important than a good statistician. One of my best friends is a PhD, Stanford University educated statistician, professor emeritus from UBC, And I'm sure he was kind of tongue in cheek, but he said, you know, Eric, if you need statistics to do to figure something out, you know, it's probably not worth doing. Well, he dismissed his entire profession, but yeah, I mean, statistics are definitely useful. In M&V, you see lots of statistics, but my point is, yes, it's important to a limit. You know, the fundamentals and the concepts, in my opinion, generally are more important than the details of the statistics. So we have a bit of time. I'm happy to go over the hour. We've got at least 6 minutes to go over question and answer. I want to thank AEE Alberta, Joshua and Sol, and Vasily, I think, helped organize this. And I'll be quiet and entertain some questions.
We want to thank you, Eric, for giving us your valuable time. Probably most of us here in the audience have been, at least have been trained by you in some sort of way. I myself did my CM course with you, and it was fantastic. Thank you so much.
I see a question. Should I just speak to it?
Yes, yes, for sure. There is. I would read it out loud from Vima.
I will.
That one.
I will read it out loud.
Go ahead.
So great. Anonymous attendee. How would you deal with contractors, for example, an electrician who don't understand the concepts of M&V when they do the measurements for you? Do you write the instructions for them as part of the M&V plan? Yes, you answered your own question. You know, I probably didn't emphasize enough, but it's very fundamental. You know, there needs to be an M&V plan, and it needs to be not overly detailed, but sufficiently detailed with things like measurements. And so yes, an M&V plan. And one other comment about electricians is, you know, myself being an engineer, I often hear engineering colleagues and architects too, for that matter, say, oh, I built this and I measured that. And I always like to ask, well, okay, you helped build that building or that pulp mill. What did you do? Did you pour concrete? Did you hook electric cables? What'd you do? You know, like, oh, no, I did the design. Well, you know, us engineers, you know, we need to work, we need those electricians. And yes, they need the training, they need the directions to do proper measurements, they need the right metering equipment, and the M&V plan should specify that, and you know, not overly specified, but enough, you know, to help ensure we get, you know, reasonable, you know, accuracy of data given the cost. So Kamal, another question, I'll just speak to that. It says, can you please comment on how effective energy modeling is for predicting energy savings from a behavior-based campaign? I can speak somewhat, yes, a behavior-based campaign. You know, the short answer is yes, it can, well, energy modeling, I'd say no, because in my experience, you know, behavior-based campaign means there are, you know, things like, you know, education, training. The Carolinas project that I mentioned a couple times, there's actually some papers co-authored. I guess if you go to mazziconsulting.com, look in the publication section, you'll see my colleague Katie Cowan and Reuben Sussman from ACEEE, and there's a public paper there talking about energy, you know, evaluation of behavior-based for energy savings. So there's more substance there. Energy modeling, my seat of the pants says no, you want to do more measurement, like before and after, and carefully keep records of these events, such as training, such as data collection, such as, you know, social marketing, outreach activities, you know, these things that you're trying to influence human behavior. So I would say measurements are more important than modeling in a behavior-based campaign, if you will. It's very difficult to model human behavior. I guess that's part of it. Matthew has another question. This is great. M&V might help uncover issues with implementing an energy saving measure by identifying that the anticipated savings are not being met, maybe lower than expected. Let me see if I got the whole question here. might be caused by a piece of new equipment that wasn't installed, probably fix it, and the unit's going to go back to where they should be. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's a question, but yes, M&V helps, you know, in prepping for this webinar. Sol and I just very briefly talked about, she asked about commissioning. Yeah, the commissioning is separate from M&V, for example, but I think it's relevant to your question, Matthew. You know, the post period of an M&V project is triggered by when that commissioning is done. But I'll also say that, you know, I've seen data. One of the projects that I cited some data, for example, I know that the operations people said, you know, it's the university fan project where there was interim M&V. They said, well, this, you know, they declared that the project was commissioned, I don't know, March 15th or something of a given year. Well, when I looked at the actual data from M&V, it was very clearly commissioned in like August, about, I don't know, 5 or 6 months later. So to me, that's relevant to your question. You know, M&V can help identify and trigger activities to fix a poorly performing system. So I agree with you.
Eric, there were a couple questions in the chat box.
Oh, sure. Let me look.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that we have this Q&A set up, and it's good that.
Yeah, I can see the chat. I can see it.
So how do we get adjusted baseline for COVID-related increased ventilation is a question Vima had.
That's a great question. Well, the best answer I can say is I know some IPMVP colleagues are working on a new application guide for non-routine adjustments for COVID. So follow IPMVP on that. Check the EVO site. I think this guide is supposed to be released very soon, like within the next month or so. I mean, there's a lot of thought being put into that. But yeah, I mean, the question to me is an excellent one, and an awareness that, yeah, adjustments do need to be made. Some adjustments may not be, you may not have the data to make the adjustments, is what I would expect in some cases. And in terms of reporting M&V and you don't have the data, it's better to say, well, we don't have the data. It's unclear. We really can't estimate the impact very accurately. And that's a better answer than, you know, lack of a better phrase, than making something up or trying to force a result. But yeah, great question.
We are over 1 hour. Well, we started a bit late, so how about we ask the last question, which is
sure.
In the chat box.
Well, I can stay and go, but I can stay for a bit, but I realize some people have meetings, so feel free to go.
Exactly, feel free to leave, but
which is the question?
It's from Vima again. What are customers most happy with? If I were to only excel at one technique.
Okay, I see the question here. The trust factor. Okay, well, first of all, customers, like, I mean, if you're I don't know, a service company or a consultant, you have lots of customers and clients. There is no one, you know, there's a whole range and distribution of what people will be happy with. I mean, my best answer is people will be happy with, you know, people will be happy when you meet their expectations, and people will be unhappy when you don't. And when you put that in terms of M&V, if you're working, I don't know, within your own company or organization to do M&V and reporting to a boss, or you're a contractor or a consultant working with a client, you know, work out what those expectations are. Like, why is the M&V being done? You know, M&V is a balance of the, you know, balancing the cost of M&V with the accuracy. So, you know, you want to make sure that that M&V investment, do your best to make, invest the appropriate amount, not too much and not too little. And of course, there's conflicts of interest. Yes, so M&V generally should be done by someone who's not involved directly with, doing the estimates and scoping and designing the project. I mean, those people are important and needed in the project, but with the actual M&V would be done by a different person. So for example, myself and a handful of other people are consultants doing M&V for BC Hydro. Well, if any of us were involved in validating and doing third-party review for the studies that preceded the M&V, then we're not assigned to do the M&V. They keep it separate, right? So those conflicts of interest, you know, we all have potential biases and conflicts of interest. So, you know, some reasonable attention to that is definitely important for M&V, and it's a huge issue in EPC, energy performance contracts. A client would be well served not to just say, well, you know, you guys get paid out of the utility bill savings, so just do the M&V and send me the results. Even the most high integrity contractor for an energy performance contract would have trouble working in that situation.
All right, Eric, thank you so much. I was just checking CET's website to see if they have a course. I thought they did this fall, but do you have any updates on that? If there is a CMVP course going on these days?
You're asking me if there's a course coming?
Yeah.
Well, check ceatcanada.com. They have the schedule. I'm not scheduled to teach any,
Okay.
but I'm not the only, you know, CMVP instructor there's in Canada. I'm sure there's some scheduled, and with this virtual arrangement, it's much more accessible, right?
Yeah.
And there is a question about the slides. Yes, I will send to Sol and
Yes,
Josh.
we will.
I'll send the PDF of the slides, and you can post them.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Again, thank you so much, Eric. I hope everybody, well, I'm already receiving emails that today's session was really informative. So thank you so much, Eric.
Appreciate the opportunity. I'm very happy to work with the Albertans. My last and final comment is my disappointment with today being the first day that Energy Efficiency Alberta is shut down, but you know, we will persevere, and glad to see things continue to move forward as best as possible there in Alberta. So thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. We'll be sending out the slides as well. Thanks, Eric.